Are we good?
I think so.
Let's do this. Let's do this thing. So, hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, good times, whatever time it is, and wherever you are listening. Join with me, as always, Mr. Chris Cute.
Cheers. How's it going?
Yeah, good. And Jamie Page.
How you doing?
He's done it again, hasn't he? I never know what he's going to come up with each week. It's kind of... It's
How you doing is so original too, Jamie. I just want to give you props for that.
But it's not...
All right, am you?
It's like the good old days.
I'm waiting for him to go, "What's up, biatch?"
Maybe next week.
Talking of good and old, we have got today's...
It
is...
What a lovely segue.
Brutal, but true. Brutal. Hey, if that wasn't true, I'd be really pissed right now.
Do you know what? I actually don't consider you, Andy, to be old in kind of air quotes. And it was kind of a weird sort of like, whoa, is it seriously? Because you posted the other day some pictures of you rocking the most awesome mohawk from, was it the early 90s?
Yeah, it's mid-90s, 95, 96, somewhere in there I wore it. Actually, that was a self-defense mechanism. After the hurricane in the Virgin Islands, it was Wild West. Absolutely Wild West. And the last thing you wanted to look like was an easy target.
Yeah.
So I got that cut. I cut that one day, basically on a dare on a job site. And I'll never forget this really rough looking Rastafarian. One point I pulled up in a Jeep that had no top, and he looks at me and I looked at him, and he goes, "Man, that's a harsh cut. That's a harsh cut."
Well, do you know what? I'm glad you said that, because I was about to say, I mean, that what I see and know of Andy now, because obviously, I mean, Andy was Andy back then as you are now, but the look of Andy now and the look of Andy then was like across the street. Do you know what I mean? But obviously, I mean, that was a deliberate thing back then.
Absolutely. That was rough, man. It was.
Well, that's what happened.
It was just like wide open. You know, minute to minute, you never knew what was going to come off the wall.
Wow.
I mean,
I can imagine. Yeah, I can imagine.
That's pretty.
Because government had lost control, and the people were now walking around going, "This is whatever I want to do today."
Yeah. It's an opportunistic. You know, all of a sudden, all the bad sides of we kind of go into the hacker mentality that we all have. Mm-hmm. And if you take that and then take opportunity and trauma and mix it all together, it gets weird quick.
And unsafe.
Evidently.
For the nuns and the preachers.
Talking of nuns and preachers, we've got to do the sponsors very quickly. So that's kind of like my little mini sermon at the start of the show, and then we're going to get back to...
Preach,
Andy's
brother, preach.
So very, very quickly. But honestly, they're definitely worth a look. As always, tonight's show is brought to you in part by Yorkshire Grit, the Woodturners Abrasive Paste, our good friend Chad at Mancrafting, Pam from Highland Boxes, and Steve Nealon from Harneal Media, who kind of gets away and does all the internet-y, backgroundy stuff and provides us with a shop for us to have nothing to sell in. But if you want to find out more about the sponsors, and 100% seriously, these are awesome people and they do awesome things, so they are definitely worth checking out on the website makesinternationalpodcast.com/sponsors. And no, Jamie, you don't put the stuff on there, do you? You just pretend to, and actually it's Steve.
No, it's definitely Steve.
Sorry, Jamie.
Definitely Steve.
You had a long run, but busted.
Wow.
Awesome.
I know. Something I can get away with, though, is I did come up with this week's topic.
You did.
Okay, here we go.
Do you want to kind of tell us what the topic is? Because
Jamie, thank you for that segue, by the way, because no telling where this was headed. Go right ahead, my friend.
So this week I kind of wanted to get into hesitations on getting into different projects for whatever reason it may be, whether it could be financial or just straight up I don't know how to, or whatever, things like that. So a good prime example could be, so when I started wood turning, I eventually wanted to dive into having a go at pen turning. And all of a sudden, I had people kind of jump down my throat and go, "No, it's a rabbit hole." And all of a sudden, I was going, okay. Do I want to get myself into a rabbit hole? You know, it's also, and there was a slight hesitation. It was like, can I really afford to do pen turning? Because people were claiming it to be such a rabbit hole. You know, so there was a slight hesitation on my part to begin with. But then I eventually got into it slowly, and eventually I did do, obviously, a little bit of pen turning. But yeah, right at the start, there was definitely some hesitation on my part to start doing pen turning.
Why? Was it because of the rabbit hole, or just because of what you heard? Or?
Not necessarily because of the rabbit hole, because that never particularly bothered me. It was just more of the costs behind it. Everyone's saying you're going to need this, you're going to need this, you're going to need this. I was like, okay, well, I can accumulate that over time, and once I've got it, but then all of a sudden it's going to be right. Well, with every pen comes their own different bushings, and so well, this is going to start costing. And it's sort of like, and I don't get a lot of money as it is, you know. So, and I'm not and that's where I started hesitating at the financial side more than anything.
Well, and it did, as you looked into it, the bushings cost what?
Pennies, really.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it's like grain of salt time to listen to the advice. It's like,
yeah.
Do you know? I find with, and it is not. I know we've got an awful lot of wood turners listening live this evening, just at some of the things. And the last thing I want to do is kind of alienate myself against all from these wood turners, but I do genuinely find that the wood turning.
Richard knows he's outnumbered.
Yeah,
I mean, what he's
it's one of those things. But I mean, I genuinely have noticed that wood turners I got nothing against wood turners or wood turning, but that sort of niche within the woodworking niche tends to be slightly more weighted to you need this, you need that. If you haven't got this, you cannot do that. To my mind, as a quote unquote outsider, because I never considered myself to be a turner in the same way as like yourself, Jamie, over and above other things. But I think a lot of it comes down to certainly from the pen turning specifically. You see a lot of people on YouTube get a lathe through whatever means, and they turn a pen, and it is always, I haven't ever seen, so correct me if I'm wrong, anyone not turn their first pen, quote unquote, that wasn't a 2-part twist, like Euro 7mm slimline.
Slimline, yeah.
And for that, I mean, you don't need, but you have a mandrel, and then the bushings, and then the kit. Yeah, the kits are cheap, but you don't need a mandrel if you turn a single body
one-piece
pen,
a one-piece Sierra
pen, or I mean, there's loads of them. I mean, okay, so the kits are more expensive, but they're never the same cost as 20-30 quid for a mandrel plus all the other little bits. So
yeah,
I think that's skewed, that sort of cost.
Well, let's put things in perspective. If you're going to buy a lathe, pen kits are cheap compared to the cost of that lathe.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah. What are you talking about?
What I'm saying is, if you take, if you say, right, I've got a lathe already, I've got the turning tools already, I've got bits of wood already, so that cost is evened out whatever you're turning.
Right.
If you just go pen kits, if you go, well, I'll have a $2, £2 slimline pen kit, but then I need a mandrel, which is about 20 quid for a cheap one, and then the bushings, which aren't expensive.
Let me ask a question. Is Jamie's hesitation basically what you're trying to say, Richard, was just a lack of education?
No, I
think part of it was as well, because I literally didn't really know that much about it at the time, and people were saying, right, you're going to need this, you're going to need this. So one of the things that they said that I was going to need was a pen press. Right now, you're talking around the area of £50 or say $65 for a pen press. Still to this day, I've never bought a pen press because you can either put it together on the lathe between two bits of wood, or you can use a quick clamp.
Yeah.
Yeah.
or a vice. I used wooden jaws on a bench vice for ages.
You know. But right off the bat, people were telling me you need to go out and spend half of $100 or $50 on one of these things, and it's like, well, no, you don't, because that's when I found my own way around doing it.
See, I bought a pen press, but only because I was doing pens just like you mentioned, Jamie. I was doing with my little quick clamps and pushing them together that way. It's just I found it. I mean, the pen press was like $25, and I went, you know what?
They're more expensive over here.
Well, I was like, well, you know what? I'll buy one for $25. I'll buy one, and I'm telling you right now, it makes your life a hell of a lot easier if you're making pens. And I haven't turned the pen in over 2 years, but I mean, you know how many pens I made that one Christmas for my wife.
Yeah.
Oh my God! If I didn't have that pen press, I'd have been going nuts. But anyway, whatever. So the hesitation was basically because you didn't know enough.
Yeah.
And the perception on your part was that it was expensive.
Yeah, exactly. When I was sat down and thought, right, if I need this, and this, well, that's all of a sudden going to add up to this. I was going to think, well, I haven't got the money for that. Yeah, and if that's going to be every single time I want to turn a few pens, I just can't justify it.
I also have to wonder if we're easing into that mentality of if you come from, the scope of I don't have the money to do it the way everybody does it. To me, there are those among us who the reaction is almost too quick to go into complete hack mode. Okay, how can I, not have to buy a pen press? How can I not have to, like you guys instantly start talking about a one-piece pen. To me, I almost have to fight the other side of that. Is there are many times when I go too quick to hacker mode, when in reality I should take a step back and buy the right equipment, because there's going to be enough pieces that I do that way. But there's no doubt about it in my mind. The first knee-jerk reaction, the one that is just like right under the skin, is to figure out a way with what I have. To me, that comes from working on site, Richard. There are 50% of the time that you're making stuff on site, you don't have the right, proper, by the book equipment. You just don't have it. So you instantly, well, what's in the truck? Who's got, a sander in their truck, and get what you have together to save hour sending somebody back to the shop to get what you need. How can I
get away with it? It goes back to my dad. The first couple of things he taught me was the first rule he taught me when he was trying to teach me how to build things, work on my car, woodworking, whatever, was first lesson was don't work against yourself. And as a child, that makes a lot of sense, because a lot of times if we're inexperienced people, we do end up working against. Second rule was right tool for the right job. And he always stressed that. He says, if you're going to do a job, use the right tool for the right job. But we all do what you just said, Andy. Even I, to this day, even having that ingrained to me in my head from my father, I look to see if there's a way I can't hack this in case, whatever I have, if it's not convenient or if I don't happen to own it, I'll try to hack it. And then if I can't hack it, then I'll go buy it. But
right.
the problem with failing at hacking something is you normally screw it the hell up.
True.
I think there's kind of a happy medium there, though. And I think it depends on two factors. And I'm going to try and argue these two factors. The first one from the pen point of view, and the second one from the site point of view, because I'm thinking of a specific incident from actually last week with me. but from the pen, if you're getting into pens, I genuinely believe if you're getting into something, you're still a bit sort of do I, don't I? Isn't it worth it? Might I like it? Might I not? So from the pen point of view, 100%, I think a one-piece pen is that because it's actually easier to turn as well, and you get a better quality pen, generally speaking, from those two parts. But also, you can. I actually priced it up with a kind of a mid-range kit that we had at Maker Central through Taylor Murfield the other year. they're about £5 for. In fact, they're about £6 now for the pen kit. That's 3 times as much as
A twist pen.
the slim lines.
Slimline, yeah.
But you can get the bushings, same price for bushings, whether they're for a mandrel or for their between centres. So about £3 or £4. But you only need a not a live centre, a dead centre, a drive centre. Yeah,
Spur drive.
No, not a spur drive. It's just, the 60-degree points you get on a live centre.
Yeah.
They're just a chunk of metal that you put it under tension and it spins. And they're like £1. They're really cheap. So actually, to get into pen turning, to turn a really, really high-quality pen for your first pen that's easier, it costs about half the price of just the mandrel. And a cheap mandrel as well. So there's quite actually a difference there. And then you can be like, actually, no, I might turn a few. Or actually, I love this, I'm going to start a business from it.
What about on the job?
So on the job, I got asked by one of my clients to board out their loft. They got a load of junk they wanted to put up there, and they were sick of balancing between the joists. So I put in a larger opening, and we were putting in 8 by 2 foot sheets of flooring, which is like a proper using new builds. But of course, if anyone's when you lay a floor, you cut the first bit you cut the kind of tongue and groove off one end, goes up against the wall, and then you just keep going until you get to the end and you cut the next size, and then the bit that's left over goes back to the start, and you kind of just stagger your way along. Of course, every single sheet of this flooring had to be cut, and I thought, I won't take my track saw, because then it's extractor, it's track saw, it's tracks. I just take my circular saw, because it doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to be straight. But I forgot to take my guide rail.
Oh, jeez.
So I'm like, well, I could just kind of mark a square and cut it by eye. But actually, it'd be easier to just knock up like the old J. Bates bit of plywood, factory edge, glue
where's
the bit
the 2x4 in the clamp when you need it, right?
So I literally just took up one of these, because they'd used 9mm ply in part. In fact, I think it was 12mm MDF. It might even still be around. Anyway, say 12mm MDF, half-inch bits across the ceiling joists. And that's a perfect, for my mind, it's a bit of a hack, because it was cheaper than going, I'll go back and get my guide. So I'll just use that bit of MDF. I'll cut the end off. I'll rip a bit off, and I'll glue it up, and just knocked up a.
But as a beginner, Richard, that's not something you would know, or even know how to do. As a beginner, if you've never done it before, you wouldn't know that.
No, probably not. But I think it's all part of. I think a lot of people know that kind of circular saw guide.
I know, but we're talking about hesitations today, so I'm just saying that I don't know.
But the hesitation was: do I go back and get, like Andy was saying, you go back and get it, or do you just hack it? It's like, what do I do? I've got to make a decision based on which way or the other. And it was like, do you know what? Actually, we can go one way or the other. And I chose the kind of the hack side. So I think hacking it actually has a good place.
Well, okay, all right. Well, you know what? I'll briefly go over because I mean, we probably all have hesitations. There's a lot of folks out in the chat still talking about pens.
It's because they're all turners. That's what I said.
So, all right. I'll give you a quick story about a hesitation that I still have today, and I think the hesitation is somewhat warranted. But I'll leave it up to you, and then I want to get to Andy, because I know Andy has done a lot of things where he's just kind of nodded his head and jumped into it. My hesitation that I'm currently in, I don't want to say I'm afraid of it, because I'm not afraid of it. I know there's nothing I can put my mind to that I can't figure out. Whether depending on how good I'll be at it, is a different story. But I know that I can figure out the basics on how to do anything if I put my mind to it. Because for the longest time I was thinking I wanted a CNC. Because I could see the use of using a CNC in carving to make pieces, even more involved. And because I'm not a carver, but here was my hesitation. The first hesitation started with my lack of computer skills. And I'm not going to lie to anybody. When it comes to the computer, I'm a friggin' doofus. All right. I mean, I don't even know that I could do a proper Excel worksheet at this point in time. I know how to work Word. That's about it. I mean, I know the programs that I have on my computer because I've learned them. And I'm not really afraid of learning how to figure out accesses. And I know I can figure that part out. But the hesitancy on my part was the cost of the CNC. Because it's not something you jump into that doesn't take a nice bite out of your wallet. There aren't cheap CNCs that anybody's going to call a great investment. I wanted to make an investment, but I wasn't quite sure if it was going to be something I was really going to be attuned to using that often. I'm a hobbyist, for crying out loud. I don't sell what I make. I just thought a CNC would help accentuate some of the pieces that I do make. And so my hesitation there was twofold. It was A, I don't have the computer knowledge, and B, that's a lot more money for me in perspective than it should be. If I was a professional, it'd be a different story. But I'm not. So is that a hesitation that's warranted? And I'm not asking for acceptance here. I'm just wondering, is that a hesitation that makes sense for somebody to have?
What do you think, Andy? Because you're quite CNC'd up at the moment, aren't you, with your little...
Yeah, I mean, talk about a hack. I mean, that's the ultimate hack on that particular thing is, I would never, ever think about buying... I just wouldn't buy a, 4x4 or 4x8 bedded CNC. It's just nothing that I both... to me...
I wouldn't want that one that big either, to be quite honest with you. But yeah, I hear you.
Yeah, there's no room. And, for me, it is, I do have to meter a lot of what I say, especially online, because and Richard, you can back me up on this. Everything like this goes into a little bit of a different process because it has to make sense money-wise for me. Mm-hmm. I mean, there are things I get into like sewing that are just for the absolute
joy of doing it.
Just, I've never done it, so I want to do it.
Right.
But as far as what happens in the shop, for the most part, most of what I have, the reason I still have a 1.5-horse contractor saw is because I have yet to see that be a serious limitation on what I can make with it. Now, as I'm aging, I'm starting to think it's probably a good idea to start thinking about a saw stop.
There you go.
But yeah, I have to run it through a little bit different
filter than I would.
Filter, right. But to me, I would say for you, Chris, if the challenge of learning those things was attractive to you, then you should dive in. Okay. If those are impediments to getting carved pieces that you want to get, then you shouldn't. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no. Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head because it's not actually something that I truly want to do, Andy. It's just something that I thought I could add to a skill set in case. And that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money to spend on just in case. You know what I mean? And so that hesitation is going to remain with me until I find a way to make it profitable. Let's put it that way. I would need to get into business of selling the stuff I make before I think I'd jump in there. But then I would have no hesitancy because I would have no problem doing it.
Right.
Personally, I mean, I kind of back up what Andy was saying about the hesitation for me is generally around the commercial viability of something and the space available. Having from a CNC side of it, I was one of the lucky 20,000 people, or however many it was, that got an X-Carve when they came out, and I instantly went, "Yeah, I'll have the big one. I'll have the big one with the big motors." And it arrived, and I was like, "Holy moly!
Where am I going to put this?
Just where am I going to sleep?" It's a meter. You go, yeah, it's only a meter. It's only like just over 3 foot. That's not much. Like, wow, it's a big chunk of floor space. My only regret with that was that I didn't get the small one, which kind of sounds weird. I never thought I'd say that out aloud. I mean, I have done since several times, but when I kind of realised, I was like, I never thought I'd say that. And it was almost one of those, I kind of should have hesitated, because had I have hesitated, I probably would have gone, actually, that's not going to, you know, and it probably would have hit me, because there were very few things that I've done on it to date that I couldn't have done on the smaller one.
Yeah, and that whole X-Carve, I meant to get into that when I was talking about this, and forgive me for interrupting, Richard. Because when X-Carve was giving those machines out like candy, and that was probably, 4 or 5 years ago?
Yeah, about five years, I think.
About 5 years ago. And anyway, I know at least 2 gentlemen who received an X-Carve and got it, were in my situation, obviously they didn't have the cost to worry about it anymore. It was just a matter of learning the programming for it. And they just looked at it and looked at what it was going to take, and they sold it. They ended up selling it and buying. One of the gentlemen I knew sold it and bought a drum sander instead. The other guy sold it, and I don't know. I think he probably pocketed the money. I don't know. But I mean, I saw at least 2 guys there I know that just freaking gave up on the darn thing. And I don't give up that easily, so I'm not sure that would have been my case. But Andy, I want to get into you, because you told a story, and I don't remember if it was here or if it was I just saw it in text or on one of your posts or something, where you were talking about the first church job that you got. And I'll let you tell the story.
Yeah, I mean, the hard part in the States is multifaceted, but for an old, here an old church in my area would be 100 years old, which I know to you guys in the UK is laughable, but there was a huge at the turn of the century, there was a huge boom in church building for whatever reason. And in the 70s, that's all of the stuff that made those rooms very Gothic, neo-Gothic, Victorian Gothic. All the stuff was blown out of there, and they brought in modern art and all of that. Basically, I got hooked up with a good sized church that they approached me through a consultant that I knew, and basically said, we have these. This is what we want to do. Build this 10-meter tall altarpiece. Is that something you can do? And I remember just like without hesitation going, yeah, man, that's right. That's what I do. And, it's just kind of where do they say that angels go or fools go where angels fear to tread? I truly had zero concept, but I also, for whatever reason, and a lot of it had to do with working in the Caribbean. We pulled some stuff out of our wazoo that should never be able to be done in the middle of the ocean ever. And yet we were doing it. And so, you kind of, I think like this hacker mentality is such a two-edged sword, because on one side it can get way out of control and you can dork some stuff up bad. Mm-hmm. But to me, it's like, it's a risk reward ratio. And to me, if you have a finely tuned risk reward meter that says, yeah, I'm way over my head, but I have these skills and I think I can make those two come together. I don't have to know the details of how I'm going to do it, because that's not important. To me, this kind of goes back to what Jamie was saying is, to me, let's not forget that the most important tool we have is right here, right?
Between our ears, yeah.
We can get around most of the stuff. Yeah, obviously there's limits to where, safety wise and all that stuff. But yeah, I mean, I'll never forget my brother-in-law, and this was a bid. We had to make a bid for building these furniture pieces. And that was the scariest part of it. Not saying, yeah, we can do it. was, are we going to die on the vine? Because I do need time to figure this out.
Mm-hmm.
And, most of the time when you're in business, you're breaking things down by the hour, by the man hour or the man day. We were breaking things down to the man month. So how many months do you think it would take for 2 guys to build this? And give me a ballpark on what you think materials are. How much should we allow for tooling? And I mean, that was very nearly throwing darts at that point because we really had no clue. But the simple fact of the matter is.
Now I hear a couple things there. A, you had confidence in yourself. You had enough self-confidence to say yeah to that with no problem. Because you just kind of went to yourself and you went, I told this guy this, hey man, this is what we do. And at the same time, you're going, I've never done this shit before in my entire freaking life, but I have enough up here. I feel confident enough to say, yeah, we can do that, not a problem, and I'll figure it out. So A, confidence is in there, and then B, obviously, if you got the gig, which apparently you did, you had a client that was willing to, allow you the time to build something quality as opposed to a rush build. I mean, because you've been in situations like, because I know we've heard you talk about it, where you had, because you deal with different types of people. You deal with the church as far as what they need, but sometimes the church has a designer. and you have to deal with that designer dude, and the church has a schedule, and the designer puts this whole thing out of friggin' whack. Because if the designer wasn't there, you could probably deliver on the church's schedule, but enter the third wheel, and there goes the kitchen. I mean, it's like, is this guy? Yeah, go for it. Tell me about that, because that's an interesting hesitation right there. If you go into a church and they ask you, can you do it? And you go, yeah, sure, no problem. And they go, okay, well, great. We have this guy who's our designer. That doesn't make you get in a canoe and backpedal. What does?
I would have to, and Richard will probably nod his head on this one. I think the known parameters are never what kill you. It's the unknown parameters. And designers, God bless them, I need them. They're something that I get work through them, but my word, here's the hard part is they bring you really sexy work that you want to do. I mean, it's really like, oh man, for me, if I go into a neo-Gothic room, I'm hooked. I want it. I want to start touching stuff in the room, like weird style, right? Uh-huh. The hard part is
let's not get creepy, all right? Just
it is what it is, bro.
I'm so glad this is going to be an audio thing, and there's only a few people that are watching.
Just understand, under this, I'm going to play the Addams Family tune.
Yeah. But you got a bit of dribble coming down the corner of your mouth.
Exactly. Sorry. But yeah, to me, that's an old building. Again, I use that term knowing what my place is in the world. But an old building will throw you a lot of curveballs. But for the most part, now anyway, you've got a pretty decent clue of how things would have to go down and the general construction. Like the last church I did was just about 3 miles from the most dangerous earthquake fault line in the U.S., way more dangerous than the San Andreas in California.
No kidding.
It's called the New Madrid Fault. And the problem with it is it's not slipping. It slips about once every 100 years, and it changes the course of the Mississippi River the last time it slipped. So that was a huge design parameter for me. And in the work that I do, you got to make it super like wetty, cakey, frilly and all that stuff. But on the bones of it still have to be engineered.
It's interesting, actually. You talk about how old buildings throwing curveballs, and it's the unknown. I get exactly the same thing with the old Windows, and I mean the ones I'm working on at the moment, they're only maybe like 40 years old. I want to say maybe not even that, maybe only 30 years old. But then the previous large job I did to that, they were about 160 years old, and the building even older. And it's a difficult conversation to have with clients because they're generally we've got this problem,
fix it.
You're here to fix it. I want to know how much it's going to cost and how long you're going to take. And they're actually very reasonable questions. The difficulty is not in saying, yes, I can fix it. No, I can't fix it. That's generally fairly easy, even from the point of view of you go, well, they're a bit large. That's going to be difficult because I'm on my own. How am I going? Yes, I can get it out. The minutiae of how and the logistics and the practicalities of it are slightly more of a like, oh. But actually, when it comes down to brass tacks, yes, it can be done. The difficulty, and I think a lot of the time, the skill, and perhaps even an equal skill to actually physically doing the job, is to be able to say to people, well, you don't really understand what the complexities of how this thing works, let alone the skill involved in fixing it. Now throw into the fact that I'm looking at this from, basically I'm only seeing the skin. I can't see what's underneath. I can't see the complications that are likely to occur once I get into it. That might take longer, and it's about kind of managing people's expectations as well, but being able to say, well, it might sling it down with rain, so that's going to take longer. So I've got to consider the weather, and so actually, what you're going to get for an answer is yes, it can be done, but it'll probably cost about this and take about that long. For these reasons. And when you explain, what I found over the years is when you explain that to people in a simplistic enough way that individual can understand it, you get a better response. Does that make? I don't even know if I made sense there.
No, it does, because a lot of what you're saying is a lot of times the clients just don't understand because they don't know what you're doing or how to do it themselves. Otherwise, they'd be doing it. I
don't fully understand what I'm going to need to do because that looks pretty rotten. But how far deep does that rock go?
And you don't need to teach your clients joinery just to let them know that this may go south if I pulled this thing out and there's dry rotted wood all the way around this friggin' thing. Then we're going to have more cost.
Absolutely. But sometimes it's how deep down the rabbit hole are they going to have to kind of be pulling out £5 notes? That's the
right.
You know what I mean? It's like this could go wrong or this could go badly wrong. You know, but not in terms of me messing it up. Just the amount of work and the cost involved, and when you think you kind of just being a little bit, the skill is in knowing the person, but you have to make quite a quick decision on how this person's going to react and how best to approach it.
How receptive they are to the message. I get it. I'm going to get to the questions that we have today, and because we have several that are from Andy Pugh, which are very good. Thanks again, Andy, for the questions. But I also, Andy, before we leave today, I want to touch back in with you on how you learned casting, because I know that wasn't something that you just walked in and all of a sudden immaculately learned. But Andy asked questions, and obviously Andy is in the sucking up mood to a fellow Andy today, because he says, Andy is definitely a good guy to talk about this. Okay.
That's a terrible idea.
Andy
really is.
We can smell the suck up from here, dude. All right. Anyway, I'm just kidding.
Two Andys don't make a right.
No, and
you got that right.
Two Andys don't make a Lutz. Here we go.
There you go.
I guess I'll start with you, Andy, and then we'll just kind of pass around and see if anybody else wants to chime in on this one. I'm probably going to pass. Have you in the past failed to take on a project from fear that the project is too big? And if so, what was it? I'm going to guess I already know your answer, Andy. Okay, there you go.
I have. I've definitely walked away from some big, especially after 2008, when I really, had to lose the 4,000 square foot shop and move into my garage, you definitely get different parameters, and you lose all the employees. For me, it's more about, I don't really look at it like losing a job. To me, it's just I'm lucky enough now where you have enough of a local reputation, and social media oddly has really helped this in ways that I never would have guessed locally. But there's just a certain street cred where you don't have to take everything, and especially now as I'm sort of pre-planning, my physical capabilities declining, it becomes more of, okay, what do I want to do? What can I do? And what makes sense to put food and rent on the table.
So your hesitancy or lack thereof, it has nothing to do with fear. It has to do with it has to do with more of a functional process in your shop. I mean, I could do a 12.5 foot by 24 foot stained glass window. I know I have the capability of doing it. I just don't have the space to do it. So
it's funny you should go.
It's not hard.
It's funny you should go there, Chris.
Yeah.
Because when I had to lose all my employees in 2008, like a day later, I got a job doing 12 foot wide by 22 foot tall stained glass window frame. And I didn't have the floor space, and I didn't have the employees suddenly. So literally in my garage, it went about 3 inches from the back wall, and I could just close the garage door.
No kidding.
Was that big, and it was probably, I don't know, a foot thick, in layers. Whoa. I don't know if you know how tracery is built.
Oh yeah.
You lay in layers and overlap the joints. It's kind of sort of like shipbuilding, I guess, because it's all circular in Gothic arches and stuff. And wow. Yeah, and on that one, I got a 60-foot lift and had an 8-foot basket in it. And I built a shop that I could work on the lift. The table saw went off the end. There was a shelf for the chop box. The other end had an area where I cantilevered out a belt sander that I had fashioned into a stationary sander, and it was just all this stuff that hung off the basket. And again, it goes back to that hacker mode of, I don't have, this is a contract, and I don't have the option to start crying. And even though you want to, it's just like, stay with it. And I'm a big believer in, you keep whacking at stuff. Eventually it'll give up to the stronger will.
It's interesting that we always kind of go back to that hacker label, and actually, I'm not a huge fan of it, because what is a stationary sander? It's usually a belt sander on its side. It's just usually bigger. It's usually metal, but actually for portability and temporary stuff, doing exactly what you did there.
Richard, back to the question. Have you I know, but I mean, I get it. Have you in the past failed to take on a project because it was too big, or because you were afraid to do it? Let me ask you, have you ever turned something down that you were afraid to do because it was too big?
No,
not. It's the afraid to do is. It's always a bit like Andy. I've only ever declined stuff that has been impractical to do. And actually, one thing I've noticed, a bit of a cheat, I think. One of my long-term clients, actually only about a week ago, we were having a conversation about one job, and they were talking about having a new front door. And they said, we want you to make our front door. And we physically make our new front door. And I was like, I probably could do it. I haven't really got the space because I've got very limited space. But it also boils down to tooling and machinery and the practicalities of it. So it's not out of fear. It's about,
practicality.
I could do it, but I'm going to have to charge you way more than it's worth because of the issues that I'm going to face. So
that makes a ton of sense.
Buy one and I'll hang it for you. It's that sort of.
Now, Jamie, you and I, we don't really do things for money, but have you ever turned down a request because it was too big?
So, not that it's been too big. So I think we've kind of covered this on the podcast before. So I've been asked once before, and once more recently, be asked to make an urn. Now I don't doubt my skills that I could make an urn easily on the lathe. But if someone come to me and said, "Could you make me a lidded vase?" No problem. There you go. Give me a bit of wood, or there's a bit of wood. There's your lidded vase. But there's some stigma behind the word urn that stops me from doing it every single time, and I don't know why.
It's sort of a contextual thing, isn't it?
Oh, I know. Well, maybe you can fill me in because Andy, Jamie, I was requested to turn an urn for somebody that was actually a extended family member when they passed, and I turned that down. Not because I was afraid to do it, but I was too emotionally involved in the project to want to do it.
But the more recent one, I had no idea who the person was. I was no relation to him. Never met the person before in my life, and I still couldn't do it.
Well, this is somebody whose ashes are going to be interned for eternity into whatever you make. There's a bit of pressure there. It's like this is better. This better be good.
What it is. Right. I think that's what it is.
It's kind of funny. I just finished one for my mother-in-law and father-in-law, and she had asked me years ago that she told me, she said, "I want you to build it," and it wasn't a request. My mother-in-law didn't request anything.
No,
She's magic.
Probably a different case. Okay.
But I have a client now who saw pictures of that urn on social media, I believe it was, and he and his wife want a communal urn we are in talks now of, discussing how that's going to be built. And, the first meeting went about getting to know them and getting them involved with the process. And, it gets pretty real pretty quick.
Kind of heady.
But it's, on one hand, it's really cool because in the course of the meeting, you can feel, especially in this case, the wife, going from this is really awkward conversation to I'm enjoying the freedom of the intimacy of the conversation. And, that gets really different from the craft, from like tactile involvement in the craft.
I get it. I don't want to get too dark into this, morbid. But it's like morbid into this, but it's like having somebody sit down before you pass on and chat with them about custom making a coffin for you. Mm-hmm. I mean, because that is essentially what you are doing. Sure. It's like it's not an easy thing to do, and I did that out of emotion, and also I got to be honest with you, I did that straight out of fear that it wouldn't be good enough, because. You put all that put together, and that gets to be a pretty big friggin' ask. Anyway, and they couldn't understand why I wouldn't want to do it. And it wasn't that they didn't want to do it in retrospect for this person, because I loved this person. It's just that I didn't think I was the one who should do that. Anyway, next questions. Let me move on here. How can someone tell when it's? I think we've covered the next two, Andy. But we'll run through these rather quickly. Then I think. How can someone tell when it's a good idea to not do something? And I get the key question to this one is: can fear actually be a good thing? And I think fear being a good thing.
I think it can.
I think it can. I think it can too. I think that's a real creative. Inspiration. When fear becomes a factor, then you tend to get creative. Anyway, so the question I guess he's asking is: can someone tell when it's a good idea not to do something?
Yeah, I think you have to. I think that goes back to sort of a gut a gut reaction that, experience, of course, is a teacher. I mean, I'm all for people pushing their capacity. But there has to be a metered, I always think about it like when you're carving. The way I was taught to carve was to this is the accelerator and this is the brake. So you have in the same motion, you have pushing from a chisel hand, in my case, my right hand, but on top of the blade is the brake so that blade can't get out of control. Mm-hmm. And, when you're working in with that sharp of tooling, you got to have the brakes on. And I think that's both, emotionally and just pure safety wise, you gotta always be thinking about the brakes. What I used to do with my employees was, before we did anything that was remotely sketchy, I would have everybody go around and say, okay, where can this go wrong? So in essence, we are making mistakes verbally before we're touching anything, right? So somebody would say, okay, it could go wrong this way. Well, a lot of times, even if it was ridiculous, we could drop this. Okay, how do we not drop this, 4-foot rondelle of stained glass? Well, okay, we hand it from here to here to here till we have to get it down the scaffolding, all that stuff. Mm-hmm. So it's all pre-planning. And to me, that takes a lot of the fear out of it, because you've already gone through the ways you could dork it up ahead of time.
So the question being, how can someone tell when it's a good idea not to do something? Your answer is basically,
leave it to your gut feeling, I think.
If you can't figure out how to pre-plan doing it safely, then I guess that would be the answer. I mean, if you can't yourself figure out how to pre-plan doing something safely and to the standards that you want to hold, then maybe you shouldn't do it. I don't think there's anything that you can't pre-plan for if you actually spend the time to think it out.
Well, I guess my point is, it's not so much about that you come up with the plan, but you go through the exercise
in your head.
You end up with several plans for several non-existent eventualities.
Right.
I find this a lot in restoration work with windows, is how far back does this rot go? Well, actually, if it's only this deep, I'm probably only going to hit this much. If it hasn't gone all the way through, I can use this repair. If it's gone all the way through, or I've got to take out full components, and if that's happened, how am I going to rejoin them? Because there's different. You end up with, at every little stage, 4 different possibilities and 5 different solutions. Mm-hmm. It's always good to have more solutions than it is possible plans. And
it's like tools.
And you'll find they overlap. So that actually, we were lucky on this window, but actually it's worse on that window. And that's not just about the physical repair of something. It also boils down to money. If you're doing stuff for money, and you get lucky on part A, you might get unlucky on part B, but you're kind of covered because you sort of averaged it out. Whereas if you just take everything a little bit too cautiously, and suddenly you have to go cap in hand and say, well, it's going to be more, because nobody likes that.
Right.
But also something we haven't actually covered, which sort of came in, you're talking about having a gut feeling of things. It's about sometimes, and I hate to say it, the client as well. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, you must have.
You don't have to hate to. You don't have to hate to say that. I mean, that's
you
pretty
come
common.
Across, people you think, do I want to work for the person? Not. It's not. It's got nothing to do with the job. The job could be, nice and easy, but it's the problems don't always come from the project. Sometimes they come from the site, shall we say? And that comes down to experience. And I don't know about you, Andy, but these days, as soon as the alarm bell goes off, that's it. It's time to pull the handle.
It's time to bill. Yeah.
Even on the simplest of tasks. because that
absolutely
experience kicks in there, and you have to have been burnt basically before you really understand that.
Third degree over 90% of your body.
Absolutely, yeah.
All right, well, this is the last question he had, and I'll just mention that Gerald's out in the chat, and the Red Smith. He's doubting that Andy pre-plans anything.
Escape routes.
Escape route. He's tunneled everything before because he can just disappear in a tunnel. Next question is hurdles. How do you overcome them? And and Andy, in the context, I guess you're asking here, I guess you're talking about the hesitation, because I think the hesitation, the title of this episode was Hesitation, Pause, Inaction, which basically means if you hesitate, you pause, which not always, but the majority of the time results in inaction, which means you can just never do it. So this is what we're trying to overcome here. So he says, how can we overcome the hurdles? Should we dive straight in, or are there other strategies? I'm the dive straight in guy, but I'm not the. I want to be blatantly ignorant before I dive in. This is, but it's like it's a matter of doing something for the first time. I've never done this ever in my life, so I will spend some time figuring out what I should really know before I jump in. Before I actually do the jump. So I don't know that it's dive straight in is quite where I'm coming from, but that's the question, guys. How do you want to field it?
Yeah, watch a few YouTube videos, then jump straight in. That's what I usually do.
It's true in a lot of ways. To me, it's the same as cooking. If I know what I want to cook, I'm going to go to the web, see 3 or 4 things.
YouTube channel.
Sorry?
Go to Franco's YouTube channel.
Yeah, exactly. But, I won't do it the way that they did it, because if you have enough experience, the ins and outs of it. Mm-hmm. But it's just little, you're not sure exactly where the trail is, but you know where the breadcrumbs are headed, Mm-hmm. And to me, for my headspace, the worst thing in the world is when I auger in, I call it, when something stops me dead in my tracks. And typically, especially on a complex thing like a church thing, I tend to pivot completely away from that and go make little bits of something. And then the very action of reconnecting tactily, for me, starts the mental thing back up.
It opens up the headspace for that stuff to happen. Yeah, I hear you.
I think it has to do with not concentrating on the problem, of letting the subconscious grind in the background. I'm fascinated with that kind of psychology rubbish, but it's just to mentally walk away from the issue that's directly in front of you that you're banging your nose on.
Got it. Find a way around it without thinking about that. Guys, I think we're almost out of time. And Andy, I want to talk to you about a lot of other things. But before we go, I want to ask you personally, because you were here for a reason. It was because I know your reputation as far as, like we talked about at the very beginning, how you have jumped in on a lot of things and just gone, oh yeah, I can do that, and then figured out later, I can do this now. And so you've had the bravado to do that. But is there anything that we didn't cover today that you think really needs to get out there, or have we touched on enough of what you feel we should have?
2 things I would say. One is what we've talked about a little bit, was taking the time to pre-plan your mistakes. And by that, of course, we mean making those mistakes without physically putting yourself either in harm's way, material at harm's way, whatever. Make more mistakes in your head than you do on your bench, I guess. Gotcha. Is what I'm saying. The other one, I just lost. I lost it. It just escaped me. I forgot. So I guess that would be part of it. I mean, this is a very fine line. I'm sorry, Jamie?
Don't forget would be the second one.
Yeah, exactly. Don't forget. and don't pull, hammers towards your teeth. That's also a good key that I've found.
Yeah, that's my dad's lesson. Don't work against yourself. Yeah.
I think a lot of it boils down to the potential consequence of whatever the action or the mistake is. If you're in your workshop and you're just merrily getting on with something that you haven't tried before, whether it's, I don't know, an off-center turning or using a new tool or something like that. The consequence, aside of injury, and we'll just take injury as a potential hazard wherever and whatever it is you're doing. So if you take that out of the equation for just a second, is potentially there is very little financial ramifications of what you're doing. Whereas if you're doing something for money for somebody else on somebody else's property to somebody else's property, there are potentially much bigger risks involved. For the point of view of drilling through a pipe or cutting a cable or smashing a stained glass window or whatever it is, that is a bigger headache than if you just have to go to Home Depot and buy another piece of timber.
Absolutely.
So it's that for me generally dictates the speed and ferocity at which I go at something. And I don't know if Andy could probably attest to this. If you're trying to remove some delicate implement, you can't just go rocking in there with bolsters and crowbars. You've got to kind of go in poking around and finding out where
with a bit more finesse than you would if you were ripping out an old door frame.
I always like to take things apart than demo. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
You've got to get those bits of trim off, and you've got to lift the carpet and kind of start scratching away. Even to the point that actually before I start hogging out rotten timber, I always sand around the outside, because that right there gives, once you've got that paint off, that gives you a much clearer picture of how big you're likely to have to start hogging out. Does that make sense? You've got to kind of go at a plod rather than just claw your way through things.
Gotcha. Andy, has the second thing come to mind yet, or no? Or is that just like
it. Fully lost it.
It's good and gone, gentlemen. We've got to wrap this up, which means we have to let what's his face sing.
Yeah, you do.
We need to. We really need to delete this segment. But anyway,
Make it a thing.
It's like taking the halftime show out of the Super Bowl.
Jamie's page.
Did you see this year's halftime show? It wouldn't have been bad if that thing was just freaking gone. Anyway, my opinion, Jamie, I apologize. Go right ahead and spread your vocal cords.
I've already done it, Chris.
Yeah.
Do it again. Do it again. Because I didn't hear it.
It's time for Jamie's page.
Still didn't hear it, but that time I didn't want to. Go ahead.
2 for 1. Chris is treating you like this week, guys. I'm telling you.
Oh,
guy's got a melodious. He sings like the angels.
It's Halloween.
The angels. Yeah. Right. So this segment was actually let it be known. It was actually an idea from Mr. Dale Kirkwood, which I happen to think was a really good idea. Yeah. So I'm going to actually invite people that are part of maker clubs or maker spaces or things like that to get in contact with me, so I can start giving them a weekly shout out on Jamie's page. So once the world gets back to some sort of normality, we can actually let people know that there are maker spaces out there, and let people know that you can go and contact people. It doesn't matter if you're in the States, Canada, or the UK, or in somewhere in Europe.
I don't care if you're in New Zealand or Japan.
Yeah, that doesn't matter where you are. If you're part of a maker club of some sort, get in contact with me, and we'll start shouting them places out, because
potentially have them on as have them on as guests to talk more about it,
and potentially have more about them. I guess, and highlight the actual club itself.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kind of reverting back in the show just a bit, Chris. This crossed my mind. That this kind of thing would be a sweet way to dabble a little bit in CNC. to see if you even are hip with it, right?
No,
Those
I'm hip.
spaces, those spaces, man, I think that's the magic part of those.
I think so too. Because Andy, I think if I had a makerspace around me right now that owned a CNC, I would have no hesitation about going and using theirs. My hesitation is going out and spending my own money to buy one to use on my own. That's
Sure.
I mean, yeah. Anyway, all right, Jimmy, what else you got?
Good call from Mr. Dale Kirkwood. So I've got a premiere in 23 minutes. So yeah, just to let people know about that, which is on the hour.
Because if there wasn't some Jamie self-promotion, we just wouldn't be doing our job.
So my shout out this week goes towards John Malecki and John Malecki's better half. First part of that is they're expecting a baby.
Oh, congratulations!
So congratulations to John and his other half. And my shout out actually goes to John. He put out a video this week, and he titled it "My Most Important Build to Date." He's actually made a rocking chair for when the baby arrives. It's a beautiful piece of work that he's done. So well deserved of this shout out, I believe. So yeah, John Malecki.
Awesome, does awesome work. Andy, over to you. You're our guest, so you go first after Jamie.
Hey, I gotta give it up for Mr. Red Smith. Man. I was on his premiere today. I'm not on it, but I was sitting in for the premiere of his leather map of Hyrule, which I don't know if you guys know or not, but Hyrule is the
Zelda
Breath of the Wild is
two aces in it.
Sorry,
2 aces in it.
Yeah, 2 aces. I don't even know what you're talking about.
I don't, but neither does he. Don't worry about it. Carry on.
No, that's kind of been my obsession over the last couple of years. That's where I go to detox, and it was really well done. And I can appreciate tenacity in a build. I mean, as much as I would love to be involved more with stuff that happens in an hour or two. My world is often a build is spread out over years, not minutes. So I appreciate it when somebody can sit down and he traced this map multiple times, and it was just tenacity and skill wrapped up into one. And then artistically, it really struck a chord with me. So
I like it. You're into marathons, not sprints. And I appreciate that too, knowing how hard it is to run a marathon. Richard, your turn.
Yeah, I've got a shout out this week. You'll be pleased to know, Chris. My video this week is building a shoulder plane with basically only hand tools and a cordless electric drill. But it's from the channel The Hand Toolery. And the reason I kind of found this is because I want to make a shoulder plane, because I don't know what it is. Do you buy a little ball nose or chisel plane? They're like 20-30 quid, even for the vintage ones. As soon as it becomes a shoulder plane with that little 2-inch chunk of metal on the nose, suddenly it's over 100 quid. I don't understand it. So I was like, how much? I'm not paying. So I'm looking into maybe potentially not buying one, and that's a really good video that
you're going to hack it. You're going to hack it, aren't you? You're going to hack it.
I'm going to try and hack it. Yeah, why not?
There's the mentality. There it is.
Right there. That's what we're talking about right there.
Richard's like, I don't like hackers really, but I'm going to hack this thing.
I don't like the phrase. That's not what I said. You're taking it out of context there.
Oh, it doesn't matter. It's still funny.
That's how we roll, Richard. You know that.
Yeah, but it's also a really good video as well. So, well, worth a watch.
I'll save you, Richard, and go on to mine before we wrap things up. And I've shouted this channel out before. And I don't know if you're even familiar, and you might dig this, you might not. I don't know. There's a channel out there called Flight Test, FLITE Test. They built these RC planes, and I've never really been into RC radio-controlled cars, planes, or whatever before in my life, but I just find this channel fascinating because of the stuff they do. They built these RC planes out of cardboard. And this reverts back to the episode we had not too long ago. We talked about all of a sudden we find ourselves with this accumulation of cardboard boxes and we know what to do with them. And the recycling people is going, please don't give us any more. Well, they made RC planes out of cardboard, painted them, rigged them all up, and they rigged them all up. They rigged them up purposely to drop soda cans while in flight. So they basically made dive bombers out of these RC planes. And
I like this.
I do. It was kind of, it was really cool. Anyway, you should check this out if you haven't, kids. If you, I said kids because if you have kids, this might be a little quick, kind of very inexpensive hobby to get into because the most money you're going to spend getting into this thing, I think, is going to be for the controller to control the plane, and then you've got to buy the engine to go. I mean, for an airplane, it's going to be cheaper than a car because the airplane just spins a propeller. So there's only one engine. You don't need 4 engines for each wheel. But anyway, if you have kids, and this place, these guys, they have kits and all kinds of stuff available to get you going if you want to get started in this. So if you have a chance, check out Flight Test on YouTube. Not only are these guys insane, but they're cool and they make awesome stuff. So check it out.
Cool. Wrote it down.
Richard, all yours, buddy.
Okay, so I guess that is it. Andy, it is always a pleasure having you come on because it's you. I mean, what more do we need to say? If you are still listening, then great. Who's listening at the end of the show anyway?
Even without the mohawk, even without the mohawk, Andy, we're happy to have you.
Yeah,
I think you should grow a mohawk next time. Next time,
cool.
what do you want?
That's cool. You just said that. I cannot believe you just said that. Thanks a lot.
Andy wishes he could too. Go ahead.
Exactly.
If you can't make it, fake it.
Oh, no.
Hack some kind of mohawk together. This is you we're talking about.
Now we're gonna go into that whole movie fake hair thing in places it doesn't belong. Go ahead, go.
Right, I'm definitely ending it now. So excellent, Andy. Thanks for coming on. Chris, thanks for bringing that up. Everyone else, we'll see you next week.
Take it easy, everybody.
Have a great week, everyone.
Cheers.
Awesome. As ridiculously stupid.